a process improvement for the organization, but the data that the process, the technology platform collects can actually inform strategy development within the organization. So that kind of open-minded thinking is important when it comes to analytics. It's not just a technology piece, it's not just an algorithm, it's the actual insights that will drive business value, and that's where real value can be extracted from data. And secondly, the simplest or the most primitive machine learning algorithm is k-nearest neighbors, and you can look around your neighborhood. As Sri Lanka as it stands is a bit of an outlier in the South Asian neighborhood. But in terms of population, India, which is a technology colossus, but it is a 1 billion plus market that is huge. And it has its own idiosyncrasies. Fanaticism in cricket and say Bollywood movies are two examples. And if you can tap the billion market, it's quite easy to expand maybe a recommender system or maybe a classification system or classification algorithm into those two industry sectors by themselves and earn quite a bit of money. There's also tech-savvy tourism, so everyone reads a review before they try a restaurant or before they try a hotel or before they go on some kind of guided tour or road trip. So starting with Maldives perhaps because it attracts lots of lucrative tourists, or there is a lucrative tourism industry in Maldives. That could be another space that can be explored. And also more locally, as a recent middle-income country, I'm sure Sri Lankans have a lot of needs and wants in a digitalized environment, a digitalized economy. So perhaps those can also be explored in terms of AI algorithms and analytics techniques that can improve people's lives and improve quality of life in general. So some food for thought. Again, not stepping on your toes or trying to provide you unsolicited advice, just a few ideas. And if that's not much, there's always complex global issues. So climate change being the largest and the most complex, how do you not sacrifice the conveniences of lifestyle, but also try to save the environment and also reduce carbon emissions and have some sensible earth remaining for the future generations. And there's geriatrics and aging population, which is a common problem across the world in all countries. Social inequality, again, how can basic necessities be better distributed among different groups of disadvantaged people in countries and in the world. There's also things like modern slavery, which is more of a supply chain logistics issue, or it can be captured within the supply chain solution, and also environmental issues like pollution. So why? So I would like to think, or we would like to think, Sri Lanka is politically neutral on complex issues. Trivial matters, another kettle of fish. And there's also strength in the weakness, where there is very low carbon emissions per capita in Sri Lanka. So 4.9 is the mean tons, 15 for Australia, really bad, and 0.9 for Sri Lanka. So you're starting at a good position if you're trying to tackle climate change issues, because you're leading by example. And also the concept or the notion of an island as a living lab, where you can try different sorts of techniques that can address social or environmental issues in that space. And AI is at quite an advantage, as we discuss in our center. It has extremely low overheads. You don't need $500,000 to set up a life sciences lab. You'd need $500,000 to set up a nanotech lab and so on, but AI just needs a computer and maybe some cloud services on AWS or Azure. And finally, Sri Lankan ingenuity. So as a Sri Lankan living overseas, we enjoy lots of creative outlets on YouTube or on Sri Lankan memes. So complex problems can be solved by using creativity, not so much by using technicality or more notational techniques. It's more creativity that can actually solve or address the complexity of these larger issues. So if that's too much, then there's always technical innovation. So you can invent the next deep learning or the next classification algorithm. But when you're actually trying to implement or invent a new algorithm, you should always think of the ethical aspects. This is a bit of a slide for silencing the lambs or the ethics critiques or the ethics advocates. Trustworthy AI has 3 components, and I should add to this that all our projects that we have been presenting so far has ethics approval. That's a mandatory requirement for all projects, and our center manager labors through lots of ethics questions. Does this classification algorithm try to identify people, and so on and so forth. So in terms of trustworthy AI, there's 3 components: lawful, ethical, and robust. And so lawful is a legal requirement. It's prescriptive, it's easy to understand, but ethical is the kind of the gray area. So integrity, accountability, and respect are 3 key elements that you can think of when you're actually trying to apply the algorithm. So it starts with data collection. There's GDPR to solve the data collection issues, but then when you start to apply the algorithm, there can be other issues where fusing the 2 data sets, or the insights that you get from one data set are transformed into a second data set, and then there is other complexities that arise. So that's where you need principles to guide your decisions. And robustness is also important, not to disadvantage certain communities based on, say, different social factors. So consistency in the algorithm in terms of technique, and also from a social equality perspective. So it's crucial to separate as well as combine the ethics of design, development, and use, as well as reuse. So the algorithm might work very well and ethically 5 years ago, but now there's new types of data and it's not so ethical anymore. And also intersecting with the context of use. So you could apply one, maybe recommender systems on Amazon are fine, but recommender systems on home loans are not very nice. Because they tend to discriminate between groups of people, and that can be quite socially disadvantaged for those groups. So just one slide on trustworthy AI, because it's important to address the elephant in the room. AI cannot be discussed without ethics, and that's a fair argument, and we all agree wholeheartedly with that. And then finally, the CDAC Agile approach. So it's based on Scrum. As you can see, we start with an idea problem statement, and this has heavy involvement with our industry partners, where we discuss and we try to understand the problem as much as possible from their perspective before we actually think of the algorithm. So the algorithms is that bottom red bit. And then, so we come up with a sprint backlog of what exactly needs to be completed to achieve the objectives or the outcomes of the industry partner. And then we use, and only then can we actually start using the algorithms to generate some insights and see how applicable those insights are to their expectations. And in terms of engagement outcomes, so depending on what the industry partner is expecting and their level of funding and the level of time commitment and so on, can be a proof of concept, a platform, tooling, integration, that can also lead to research outcomes such as publications, funding, and collaborations. So that's why it's not very difficult for us to approach industry, because we have this kind of open approach where we are open to listening to what their expectations are from a technology point of view. Sometimes they don't have the right data, sometimes they have to clean large volumes of data, or we have to replenish data from data augmentation and enrichment. So those are lots of data issues. Sometimes there's no technology platform that accumulates the data properly. And once we have solved them or suggested that they solve those problems, then we can actually apply the AI and the analytics and then look at insights generation from those. So on that note, I will conclude the main content. And slightly more important than this content are the questions that you might have arising in your minds. So we are quite happy to field some questions. And thank you for your keen attention. No.
Yeah, I'm Suresh from Septo. Basically, application of the AI in business specific, as my understanding, not for all, but for some particular fields, right? Maybe the early adapters may get the real value, but when it's come to the mass adoptions, it may result in negative. I can say one example, say there's an application that will predict the traffic to help the user to find the fastest path. So few users, if they use few users, they can get exact value, they can find the quickest path. But if lot of people trying to use that app, then it will take another jam. The quickest path will get jammed, right? Yeah, I know there may be some real-time feedback. We can readjust, but once I set the path, I can't go back, right? It may cost a lot. So will your self-learning or self-grown AI will address this kind of issues in the business applications?
That's correct, yes. So the absence of labeled data sets makes sure that the AI generates by itself to understand that environment. And well, the example that you provided was shortest path for traffic navigation. I guess Google Maps is the best algorithm for navigation, and that takes real-time feedback from actual users of that application to improve the paths available. So congestion is another parameter in there. So I would like to touch on the data enrichment as well. So you shouldn't just focus on the shortest path per se, but it also includes the traffic and other factors, maybe the weather even, that needs to be accommodated into an algorithmic development. So any machine learning algorithm is only as smart as the data sets that you feed into it. And that's where having a more unsupervised approach will allow you to feed in as many different parameters as you want to, and you can keep adding into it with incremental learning especially, so that it can adapt and adjust to suit the changing nature of the problem or the context that you're trying to.
So we keep on developing and evolving.
Yes, yeah, that's correct, yes. Any questions? It's too cold. It is too cold.
Hi, I'm Saji. I have a small question here.
Yes,
about data collection, and I want to know how, like, there's a biasness, like how to do the fairness when it comes to collecting the data. Let's say I was in another forum and they came up with this. You're in United States and you're thinking about, let's say, what Rashmika said, on a pedestrian path where crowds are getting engaged, they are going into a fight. Mostly what the system recognized was that these are black people who are doing that. So it's geographically very dependent. Likewise, there are many factors. So can this self-learning method, the algorithm, define that when it comes to factors like that?
Yes, to an extent. So there is always a social inequality that is reflected or represented in the actual AI algorithm and the insights that it generates. So in terms of this, similar with automated sentencing in Wisconsin, it was sentencing more African Americans than anyone else, because that's the same social inequality. So the data sets that are received by the algorithm represent that social inequality. So to some extent, or the technical argument is that it's not so much the algorithm, it's a social inequality that's surfacing in this insight. And that can actually inform policy, where maybe because of lack of education, lack of social support networks and so on, that there's more African Americans who are oriented in that direction. So there is benefit for policy development, but that's a different kind of argument or discussion point. In terms of addressing the biasness of the data sets, yes. So the importance or the value of unsupervised learning is that you can keep expanding on the types of attributes or the types of parameters you're feeding into that machine learning algorithm, as opposed to a supervised approach, because a supervised is a one-to-one mapping with so many X input variables and a single Y variable. So the more classification you're trying to do, you're trying to overfit to suit that data set. Whereas unsupervised learning or self-structuring AI doesn't have that kind of burden of having to be constrained by the labels. So the labels tend to impact on that biasness of the data set. Sorry.
My question is that sort of related to the first question actually. Can the outcome of a unsupervised learning algorithm be specified to a user? For example, now let's say I personally prefer not going on even though it's the shortest path. I would rather not go on the shortest path if say my vehicle is narrow and then I don't want to take my vehicle is quite large and I don't want to take a narrow road or something like that. So can unsupervised algorithm be created in such a way that it's more towards the end user?
Yes, so that again can be customized to suit the expectations of different users, and that's what you saw with the emotion work specifically, where we can actually identify individuality, and psycholinguistics are a method of identifying a certain set of words that you and I might use differently to express different kinds of emotions. So in that context, yes, because we can keep generating a different kind of latent representation to learn that person's expectations or that unique identity, as opposed to a supervised approach. So yes, it can accommodate different types of attributes and different categories as well to identify individuality.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, I think my first question I had initially was kind of asked, Bruce, but
Yeah.
so I guess another question
Yes.
is following up from where he mentioned where how can the output be user-centric. There was an interesting TED talk with regards to the future of democracy and being able to wade through the amount of information that everyone needs to process in order to make a decision. Since it's not possible to do it by yourself, to sort of give people sort of help through AI. With regards to the progress, will it take the whole of the next decade, or will it?
That's a difficult prediction for me, but I guess information summarization is something that AI is becoming more and more, or AI is more and more perfecting a capacity for information summarization, and that's what we see mostly on the smartphone. So from that perspective, I think information overload is also is one of the key problems, and that's where you're heading, I think, in terms of democracy of information. Is that around that?
It was to do with that there is so much of information to process.
Yes.
A person needs to make a decision to not be able to
Yes. Yeah.
offload the problems to the AI. You can look at information that based on your personal preferences,
Yeah.
whether you agree with what.
Yeah. I think the distinction between decision support and decision making. So AI is still very much should be in that support role rather than actually making the decisions. So you're aggregating as much as possible the information, and that's where again, pardon my biasness, but unsupervised learning or self-structuring AI can accommodate as many variables, as large a volume as possible to provide an aggregate of that information. So that is still a decision support tool. It's not. It can or it should never be used for the making. There has to be a human observer or human in the loop before the insight actually becomes an action. Yes.
I have two questions.
Yes.
First one is it's a new era, so we are very focused on unsupervised AI. That means self-structuring AI. So self-structuring means decisions are taken by that AI system. So we as humans, we are the only people who can provide a set of laws to that, because self-structuring, even it also have to be stopped to a level, because it's all about living beings, and it should not self-structure its intelligence without with any harm to the living being. So how can we provide a law system for self-structuring system, something like that? And second question is the DataSEARCH Research Lab Center. So how can we contribute to those projects in that forum? I would like to contribute for that. Currently I am a developer, but I am not stopping at the developer position, and so I would like to start on that field also.
Yes. I'll take the first question and pass on to Shaka for the second. So in terms of a legal framework, that's quite difficult. So there's lots of really smart people around the world hacking their brains on regulation for AI. They have developed regulation for data collection or data, well, the GDPR is for data, entirely for data. But when it comes to AI, it's quite subjective. So as I mentioned earlier, the recommender system you use for Amazon is harmless. But if you use the same recommender system for, say, automated sentencing or home loan processing application, it can have adverse effects or outcomes. So from a legal framework point of view, it's still quite difficult to implement that. So that's why we have ethics instead of legality.